You are Black in the Green Room with me, your host, Keith Underwood. And this is your spot for real talk about entertainment with entertainers, creatives, and showbiz professionals. Joining me in the room is Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter. Yes, your full government name.
Hey.
UCLA professor and leading scholar in Black urban life, culture, and power. His work examines Black spaces, movements, and reparations, making him the perfect guest to help us unpack the evolution of Black entertainment and its lasting impact. Dr. Marcus A. Hunter, welcome to the room.
Thank you so much for having me here. Peace, peace, peace.
Yes, sir. So Marcus, tell me a little bit about your area of study and then how we can lean into, a discussion about entertainment.
Yeah, so I pretty much study all things Black, or I should say I'm a student of all things Black. And
Right.
there are some areas where I know a great deal from school and books. Others I know a great deal just from living a blackety black life, so music, film, and television. And then once you go to school for a long time, you get the ability to start combining them if you choose. And I've used them because a lot of times the kind of scholarship or writing that I do is also meant to be in service of and speak back to the community I come from.
Mm,
And so, a good way to always have that connection is by leaning into the culture and bringing that into the research so people can see the overlap.
yeah. How did this area, how did it become of interest to you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a really Black household, which any person listening will completely understand what I say when I say, for example, there was a Black woman ice skater, figure skater named Debbie Thomas that was doing really well and making it to the Olympics and winning. And all of a sudden, we were watching figure skating. We loved it as a household. There was a young Black girl named Dominique Dawes who was an amazing gymnast. All of a sudden, we were watching gymnastics as a household.
Right.
Loved it. There
Yes.
were two Black girls from Compton who were beating the white girls crazy in tennis, and we became a Williams watching household. So I bring those examples up just to say that Black excellence or Black exceptionality, Black achievement was
Hmm.
always something that found its way into my household. And so as a result, part of how I see our history is through the lens of some of those folks because that's how you get exposed to what Black people are doing in the world. How are they making contributions? And then you match that up with the ability to run through every library known to man and see all of our contributions on the shelf, and you start to get a really full picture of how important the humanity and contributions of Black people have been to not
Hmm.
only this country, but to the world broadly.
Yeah. And Marcus, for you personally, what is your specific interest in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, in general, what I find, and this is just a Marcus thing, so feel free to be like, you crazy, and people listening, feel free to be like, I didn't hear that part. But for me, entertainment as an industry, as we know, especially in the United States, is an outgrowth of enslavement. We
Mm,
always think about slave labor as cotton picking or tobacco
yes.
harvesting or sugar or this or that or being a maid or a cleaner or a babysitter or a nanny, but we're not also thinking about how Black people were used to entertain, to sing, to play the piano, to do all of the things that we see Black people doing now.
You are so right about that. I mean, I think we think of the history generally, but we don't think about it that specifically. Continue,
Right.
please.
Yeah, just to the Venus Hottentot, a Black woman who was taken from South Africa and then paraded around Europe, particularly in Paris, because of her body size. And
Hmm.
so her body became a vehicle for entertainment. We might think of her in some ways as a involuntary pop star.
Right.
And that's a part of the enslavement paradigm that I think we should remember because if you fast forward, battles over pay and intellectual property and salary and wages go back to the fact that before, during slavery, you could put on plays with all Black actors and pay
Hmm.
them nothing, okay?
Right.
And also send them to do other work for you as you are entertained by their talent.
Yeah. Marcus, how do you think, systemically, how coming from that, right? And then, it happens generationally when you don't even realize it, like the influences that each generation passes on to the next. How
Right.
do you think that kind of shapes our views on entertainment now as Black people that are in the industry?
Yeah, I think two ways I hear your question on. One part, I think it goes to the African principle of Sankofa to go
Mm,
back and retrieve things. So we always have these moments in our culture where we might say somebody's getting a comeback. We might call it a comeback or a transformation or a return. Is because it's important for us to always keep them integrated as we move forward. We shouldn't forget. And then you start having battles over that. So right now, for example, the battle over Bill Cosby, the person, has
mm,
created a battle over the Cosby Show, the show, and what his legacy has been. And now it's become like a real important touch point in understanding where Black people are culturally now. At the same time, I also think, for me at least, uh, the entertainment industry also shows how it maps up against how long Black people technically have been able to be free. So you
mm,
can see thinking about the invention of film and all of these other things. And even if you think, for example, about Jordan Peele's most recent film, Nope, it begins with the premise that the first shot that was ever filmed is of a horse that was trained by a Black man. And
mm,
so, using that one idea that the first still shot we have of film is of a horse trained by a Black man, that then tells us something about the film industry running up right against emancipation, for example, or the idea of what we think about today as modern entertainment being deeply connected and having vestiges of enslavement and playing a role in how Black people get to communicate with each other, which leads to my Marcus point, which is the entertainment industry is this place where, for the most part, we can talk about pay scale and whether or not everybody's
mm,
always paid, but where Black people are paid to talk, to sing, to write, to do something that communicates with other Black people. They're paid to
mm,
do it. So that means to me, any form of Black entertainment always has a couple of levels to it that makes it richer than other people's forms because white people are talking to each other in multiple platforms and venues all the time. And there
mm,
aren't the same kinds of surveillance and boundaries around their ability to communicate with each other about their experience. We're watching it happen right now in the world, white people communicating with each other about how important they think their experience is. With Black people, it's in the music, where a person is paid to write a song, and then that song is then used to translate what the Black experience is in Oakland, for example, or
mm,
in Cleveland, Ohio, or from South Carolina, or from Atlanta, Georgia, or from Los Angeles, California, or from Philly, Pennsylvania. This is how music starts to help us communicate with each other. And so it's an important thing to pay attention to because we're actually talking, we're
mm,
sharing, and we don't have mainstream news that's always reporting what's going on and where we live. So our films, Boys in the Hood becomes an important whole placeholder for the quality of life, the experience of young Black men in Los Angeles that I might not be able to understand if I don't live there. So
mm,
I see it as doing like a lot of work, which is probably why most Black creators are more tired than other creators because there's so many elements and layers to the work that they're putting out that is often required or expected and not that expected for other groups.
mm. And that explains, the communication used in entertainment to explain the diaspora, right? But what is it? How does it translate to telling our stories historically?
Right. Yeah, telling the story historically is complicated with Black people, Black culture, and also we understand the entertainment industry to be a white funded enterprise
Hmm.
on top of that, right? We're still not at that place where Black people have, a dominant amount of holding and stakes and standing in that industry. We're working,
Hmm.
but we're not there.
Right.
Um, is we don't see our history, and by our, I mean African American folks and the story of slavery being put forward with the same level of quantity and quality as, for example, that of the Jewish experience in the Holocaust. There's this real intention effort where every year there are multiple films that remind people, through whatever version. It could be a musical, it could be a comedy, it could be satire, it could be a drama, it could be a war film, that the Holocaust happened and a group of people were nearly eliminated from the world. In our case, people do a thing of like, not another slave movie. I don't want to see that again. Don't we already got Roots? Why we got to have Harriet? Why can't we be talking about where we are now? I want a positive story. I want to watch positive stories. I don't want to watch something negative. And it's really interesting that we've allowed our story, parts of our story to be presumed as negative,
Hmm.
and that we always want to get to the part where Black people are kings and queens and they run in businesses, they got money, they're living the middle class dream, and then so on and so forth. And we think of anything separate from that as negative,
Hmm.
rather than as true. And in many ways, creating this reality of prosperity that people want to see all the time anyway.
Yes. Anyway, so we were so why do you think we sometimes shy away from those stories, and
Yeah.
I'll even expand on that idea more. I find a lot of times that we always find glamour in other cultures,
Mhm.
and see the beauty in them, but then we don't see that same beauty in us when it comes to our storytelling.
Yeah, I think one aspect of it is that we're up against a steady diet of negative information about us.
Mm,
And so there's a certain kind of vulnerability that slavery or oppression bring up, where if you're always in the news or in the film as the drug dealer, the robber, the poor person, the homeless person, the person in prison for life, like all of the ways, the bad mom, the absentee dad, all of these different images and typecasts that you're up against, people have real important feelings about participating in what they think might be casting out a negative story. And I
hmm.
would say anytime that we are telling our story, it can only be positive, because everything that people find entertaining or uplifting about our story is rooted in a shared trauma that we all have, a shared experience that we have that demonstrates that the worst can be done to a human being and they can
Mm,
still produce, we can go down the line: Marvin Gaye, Aretha Franklin, Billie Holiday, Josephine Baker, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Countee Cullen, Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Bayard Rustin, Pauli Murray, Audre Lorde, just keep going. Cicely Tyson, Dinah Washington, Diane Carroll, Sidney Poitier. They're all coming out of a shared trauma, which is
hmm.
that you're simultaneously dehumanized and then put into bondage and then spread across places that are not where you're from. And then you
Mm,
manage to become these kinds of like beacons of light and culture, which is super important. And it also, let's not forget that most people in the entertainment business tend to come from regular, schmegular, degular Black backgrounds.
hmm.
Lionel Richie is like from Tuskegee, Alabama. Okay.
Right.
There is no Motown in Tuskegee, Alabama. So also to remember that even where we come from might be these very humble beginnings rooted in a shared experience. But once given the opportunity to shine, we're able to do it in a way that encourages and inspires the rest of the world, which is super powerful.
Hmm. The Harlem Renaissance is often looked at as, the starting point for our involvement in entertainment. How do you see that, and how do you explain how that cultural revolution contributed to where we are today?
Yeah, I think one, I'm raised up in Philly. The Eagles is going to the Super Bowl, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Elaine Locke, uh,
Okay.
who uh, important Pulitzer Prize winning professor at University of California, Santa Barbara. Jeffrey Stewart wrote a wonderful biography on him for when she won a Pulitzer, but frames him as the mother of the Harlem Renaissance. What's important about that is that we also have to remember that the people we see, the Zora Neale Hurstons, the Langston Hughes, the E. E. Cummings, those folks also are being put forward by people we don't see. So there's a black man named
Mm.
Elaine Locke out of Philadelphia who in some ways is like the original Clive Davis, if we want to think about it. He
Right.
had a knack for spotting talented, gifted black kids. And he spotted Langston Hughes, he spotted Zora Hersa, and he did this thing of them presenting them to a white woman named Mary, who became the benefactress of the Harlem Renaissance. So part of what I'm bringing up here is to say you have a black man, a black queer man who's identifying black talent, taking them to a white person with money, a wealthy white person who then sponsors them to put out creative projects, which is very similar to what the entertainment industry sounds like today.
Absolutely.
Where you have
Absolutely.
a black manager, a black casting agent, shout out to Robbie Reed,
Mm.
presenting this wonderful talent to this person who's paying for the thing or the studio. And then all of a sudden, creative endeavors happen. And that's a lot of what's behind the Harlem Renaissance. So it was that you had someone identifying a talent and then had a connection to a resource that would fund the talent. And the talent then puts out plays and poems and short stories. And then also, we should remember that the Harlem Renaissance, there are players in it, but it's also a context. It's about Black people moving around with a certain freedom of movement they had never expressed before,
Mm.
finding themselves in places like Harlem or Boston or Chicago or Los Angeles, places they had never maybe even imagined before. And all of that motivation and hunger for freedom and opportunity is manifesting in these places where all of this kind of like rich types of blackness are happening. Harlem Renaissance, we're also having it run up against West Indians who are coming
Hmm.
to New York. So it's a gumbo of blackness that is producing all sorts of talent. And then you have the music of the time, jazz, expressing all other elements of it at the same time. So it's a combination of actual content, but also like an era where you might believe that there was like a party happening.
Yes. And Marcus, what do you think the draw was for white people? Their interest in our music, our sound, our stories, our look. What was the draw for them initially in that period? What do you think?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. The first thought is I think human beings are naturally attracted to fly things.
Hmm.
So even when people go and put on an outfit or create an outfit, it has a fly factor. And if your outfit is super fly, then people are going to be drawn to you. So part of it is that the output is so fly, it draws people to it.
Hmm.
And because it draws people to it, it then has a magnetic quality that can attract what? Money. So now it's a money-making opportunity. That's one. The other thing about it, and this takes me to an experience I had at the Inkwell in Martha's Vineyard, where people have never been, just imagine a sliver of beach for this purpose. And it's the place where through segregation and a bunch of other things, this is where Black people are, go, whatever. What's interesting is, rather than facing the beach, there were several white folks at the beach who were facing the Black people. I just thought that that also says a lot about how whiteness, manages and deals with Blackness. There are people who are there watching it, almost as if on safari, like watching the
Mm-hmm.
people in their own element. So I think there's also this voyeuristic quality that whiteness has about what Blackness is up to. Now, historically, it's been, through like an overseer class, which was about what Black people were up to voyeuristically, but also because you were afraid that they might, convene with each other and then Nat Turner this plantation. So there's
Hmm.
also this way of like always watching, always surveilling Black people because you also know them to be up to things. And sometimes
Yes.
those things are entertaining, and sometimes those things might be your downfall. So I think it's a combination of those things at work.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way of looking at it because then it makes you wonder, was that also a way of controlling narratives?
Right, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was
I
I was
mean,
wo-
Yeah, I think I don't even think that's a question, that's statement. Definitely. Definitely. I mean, we even here, I was watching, or I just saw like scrolled the internet earlier today, and I saw Marsai Martin, Blackish
Mhm.
fame, talking about how, she was like tearfully talking about this, that her show was being canceled. And
Mhm.
in her kind of tearful confession, she was saying studios still don't know how to target or market Black content.
Mhm.
And then you have this great product that everybody's on. And I think, as you know, when we're even thinking about a TV show or a film, that's a small business. There's like a whole crew of people who are staffing all of that. And so when we see a show go off, it's not just the actor that you know or whatever. There's a whole team that you never see. The people, like I was saying about the Harlem Renaissance, behind the camera,
Mhm.
around the camera, writing the scripts, that's a loss all the way around of community for people. And part of it comes down to this idea of like, well, what is allowed to get out? What is allowed to
Mhm.
be out there? What do we think, is acceptable? What do we think Black people like? What do we think white people will tolerate Black people liking, before it becomes censored from another angle? So there's all of these other dynamics that go into play around Black content that, for example, aren't coming up when they're thinking about renewing Friends. It's
Mhm.
just not coming up. It's not a concern or a thought. And there's so much other white content out there that Friends isn't
Mhm.
having to understand itself as standing in the gap, representing all white people.
Yeah. You know, the icons that you mentioned of the Harlem Renaissance, they suffered a lot of biases. How do you see those similar biases playing out today in entertainment?
Yeah, I mean, we hear some of it in, when you hear Taraji talk about, the pay issue.
Hmm.
And then we also hear, a Meryl Streep say a similar thing. So we hear at different layers. So we have Black women talking about being effectively paid, and then we hear women talk about being paid less than men. So you have the pay equity issue. I think also the way that industries are set up or show business is set up, it is important for people to understand that you have to make a lot of money on a film in terms of what you're paid up front in order to make the money we think you made off of it. Because you don't just get a job, you don't just get a acting role. It's you have an agent, you have a manager, you have a lawyer, and those are just three people right at the beginning that are like foundational units that are required to even play the game. Like you have to have those things. So we're
Hmm.
talking 15%, 5%, 10%. And then we can lay in the number four in America, Uncle Sam coming in with his 30%. We're already like almost 60% off of whatever that was. So let's
Hmm.
say you got $1 million for this role. People think $1 million, you're a millionaire, right? 60% of that is going right there. And the project you're working on might be anywhere between 2 weeks and 3 months or 6 months. If you're on the Lord of the Rings thing,
Hmm.
that's all you got to work that year. And so now what you made off of that needs to support you for the rest of the year while you handle rejection. And you have to appear as though, well, you were casted on The Hobbit. Like
Hmm.
you broke. You gotta be showing up on the red card. There's all of those step and repeats you got to do now for the press lead up and the premieres. And all of those clothes are coming from somewhere. That hairstyling is coming from somewhere. All of these other things are coming from somewhere. And so before you know it, it's getting back to the idea that some of these things are rooted in a system where you didn't have to pay people at all. So, what are ways that we can still be in that? And part of how you do that is requiring certain kinds of other people, middlemen and brokers, to be a part of your situation in order for you to even get paid.
Hmm. How do you think the reformations that we're seeing with DEI, how are they going to play into that?
Yeah, I have a series of thoughts around a DEI scenario. I hope mostly that it's a lesson, and this is back to the Harlem Renaissance of it all, that the Harlem Renaissance is a reminder and a teacher that being unapologetically Black is the most centered space we can be in. When we
Mm.
start branding it other things, is under attack, and we tend to also not benefit as directly. So DE and I didn't necessarily, and we don't have all of the data for it, but I would gander to say that I am pretty sure that Black people were not the most statistically likely to be benefits of this program.
Hmm.
They may have benefited, they may be beneficiaries, but they are probably not the dominant beneficiary of that model. In the same way to affirmative action, based on, issues of educational segregation and other things, the idea is built out of the Black experience, but Black people were not the dominant beneficiaries of affirmative action, even though people who are against it are always bringing up race. It was white
Hmm.
women who were the dominant beneficiaries of affirmative action. We might find that in DE and I, it's a similar dynamic when history comes to pass. Make a very long story short, or make a very long point sharp. Black things have always been taxed at a rate that is higher than other people's things.
Hmm.
And at the same time, the need for Black things always increases. So part of it is, how do we get to a balance where the tax is down or related to the need? If you need it so bad, how come it's taxed at such a high rate? That's a disincentive to get the thing
Hmm.
that you say you need so much. So how do we adjust that and fix that? And that's why I think a part of the reparations conversation is about things that we're talking about. Because
Hmm.
again, a different industry, but rooted in a similar American history.
Yes. So, so we in the last segment we were touching on how Hollywood has historically profited from Black culture while limiting, our creative control over that content. How have Black creatives fought for agency and ownership in entertainment over time?
Yeah, I mean, one clear example we could think about is Bob Johnson and BET.
Mm,
I grew up in the era of BET, and I feel grateful for it in part because I can look back now and see that I was experiencing something very special. Not just because of what it was. It's like the major Black specific network that was able to air across the country and then later the world,
hmm.
and the impact that that had. But also, what was always interesting to me about BET was that it centered itself around music first and then built out programming from that outwards, which says about the power of music in Black culture. Um, but also the power of music in terms of people consuming Black culture, that is maybe a dominant way that people experience Black culture, which then makes sense because it's only in recent time where you have like a Tyler Perry creating his own studio,
Hmm.
having, first of all, the capacity, the location, the funds, and the reputation to even do that, and have it be utilized and understood as industry standard. So there's a lot wrapped up in that. But those are examples, and as I even bring them up, I mean, we're starting in the 80s and we're moving, now we're 2020ing at this
Hmm.
point. So that's 40 years apart between a creation of BET and a creation of Tyler Perry Studios, as just examples of these attempts to like pioneer in the industry to create a space that is safe and supportive for Black creative talent and storytelling. But those are just exceptions, even still. Now, with
Hmm.
all of the channels we have more options in terms of what Black owned, or we have YouTube as well, where people are able to create and we can be supporting the creator directly. But all of those different platforms are always still demonstrating that Black creation is still in the minority, even if the hits on it are higher than some other ones. It's still not at that level yet where that there's a critical mass that we can really be discussing. And I think it's also important to distinguish between, Black films and Black studios, Black films and Black directors, Black films and
Hmm.
Black writers, Black films and Black costume designers, just all of these other ways where we can look at, just because the characters that we're presented with in front of the camera are Black, doesn't mean that there's an infrastructure of Blackness that created this project that we're all
Hmm.
liking. And so that's the other thing that I think, the film business is really a good demonstration of, because there's so many different layers in it that the average person is going to the movies and they're watching the things that they see in front of the camera. And if it's very diverse, it could lead one to go like, oh, that was a diverse cast, a diverse production. Give
Hmm.
me more of this. But if you were to read down the rest of the roster or the staff, it would be like, oh, not black, not any white, more white. Oh, wow, this is actually like a white film. This is
Hmm.
interesting. And so how do we make sure that there are continually inroads in cinematography, for example, in costume design and film scores, all of these other parts that are really important for making, for example, a film possible, that they are actually inclusive and in some ways have the Black people are empowered around it creatively as well if they are in that role.
Hmm. And what can Black people specifically do to do that independently?
Yeah, I think the very first thing always is to support Black independent creative work.
Hmm.
So you want to support your Black films, independent films. As a matter of fact, I happened to be in New York a couple of weeks back because Kevin Powell independently, he and his wife, Evangeline Lawson, independently produced this documentary on Black men and boys and what it means, what manhood means or doesn't mean.
Mm.
And it's super inclusive, going across the range of sexual orientation, age, generation, religion.
Hmm.
And he'd been working on that for 6 years. And he just recently told me that it'll be in the theater in Chicago, limited AMC theater in Chicago and New York for a week. And I was like, you're on fire. He was like, what do you mean? I'm like, that is amazing. And part of what happens is we have to be supporting these kinds of projects. So we want to support things that have Black stewardship, of course. So a director,
Hmm.
writer, all that. Shout out to Quinta Brunson and Shonda Rhimes and, all of those folks. But
Hmm.
we also want to make sure we're supporting those films that are independently being produced, written, and made and shot by Black artists. And so that's another way that you do it, because when they succeed, that demonstrates to people that there's a market, that there's an appetite and an audience for that. And one thing that most people don't deny is an appetite, audience with an appetite. And so that's also how you demonstrate it, by selecting into experiences that show that you care about the content that you are receiving.
Hmm. Your research, it often explores Black urban life spaces. How have historically Black cities and communities like Harlem, Chicago, South Side, South Central LA, how have they served as incubators for cultural revolutions, and entertainment?
Yeah, that's a great question, and also a great answer. And I would say they are, because um, one principle in a a kind of racialized society is that the minority has more safety in larger numbers. So safety in numbers then really applies to being urban, living in a dense area where other Black people are situated as a form
Hmm.
of not only thriving, but protection. If there are more of us, it's safer for us. And so cities are ways to do that. What winds up happening, though, is that you're still running up against similar systems. And now a lot of you are experiencing it at the same time. So, for example, the war on drugs. The war on drugs is impacting urban Black America at the same time across the country, and similar in different ways. And so when you see or hear music from those places, it reflects back that we're having a similar experience, but we just have
Hmm.
a different accent, a different dialogue, a different instrumental emphasis, but we're having a similar Black experience. And so that's why I think places resonate like that, where people say Harlem, USA, not necessarily
Mm.
Harlem, New York, because Harlem is standing in and is easily identifiable to so many Black people who are not living in New York, who are
Right.
not living in the North, quote unquote, but can identify with these experiences, which is, I think, in part why Black exploitation was so successful, because these urban geographies were reminiscent and similar to people about how Black life, what it looked like and what it sounded like. It made
Hmm.
sense. It was authentic.
Yeah. The 1970s, we saw, black exploitation, and then we move all the way up to the 1990s, and that's the hip hop explosion. So, what do these eras tell us about the evolution of black entertainment?
Yeah, I think on one level, we see that the train keeps going forward, and you
Hmm.
lose people along the way. So, I mean, every year we're losing another giant in our fields. Frankie Beverly last year, you just think Aretha a couple of years ago, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Prince. James Brown, Natalie Cole, like these lost Luther Vandross. Like when you lose those folks, who's there next, like, and we know that there are some people, especially pop culture, where they stop where their artists stop. So they don't know about what the new people are singing, as they might say. But we
Right.
need the new people to sing. We need them.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So like that's
Yes.
the other part about it is like you need the train to keep going forward. You need that to keep going because if it ever stops, that's when we're really in trouble. Like
Hmm.
that's when we're really at a loss because we need those young folks to be moving us forward in whatever way they're interpreting the future, whatever way they're interpreting their gifts to help us understand that our songs are still being sung, that our music is still relevant, that our stories are still relevant. It might take a good while, but I think they still resonate. I mean, this is in part why I feel like Color Purple has been able to, you know, uh, be chopped and screwed 3 times popularly and still be effective because
Right.
there are some core elements of that story that are still resonant to the Black experience without it being in Alabama in the early 1900s and or in Georgia in the early 1900s, it doesn't have to be all of that. It could be now and we still are able to connect to that story.
Yes. I thought it was interesting in the last segment how we were talking about continuing our legacies through younger voices. How do you balance that with making sure that older voices are still heard as well within the Black community?
Yeah, one level is, and this is just music here, but it's always in the art and purpose of sampling, and interpolation, as they also call an extension of that, where you directly reference the past and you put it in the present, So
Mm,
one, we're seeing a surge of that in the music where people are going to for example, Mary J. Blige's My Life album and bringing samples directly of her from that album into a new song, with a whole new artist and a different vibe. And so part of it is through that art form of, and I think sampling is a form of Sankofa, as I was saying earlier in the program, going back and retrieving things that are necessary for your journey ahead. And so that's a big part of it. I think the other thing about it is for us to always want to have more than the first, for us to want to have, I want you to be the 14th, Black woman winning lead actress Oscar, not the second, not the third.
hmm.
I want us to be on the 27th, Grammy of the year, album of the year for a Black woman. I want us to be on the 1000th, uh, Black woman Olympian in whatever category. I want us to be on 1 millionth when we're talking about Black millionaires or whatever, so all of those, when we have the first, and we're still seeing that and still experiencing that. And so that says that we
Hmm.
have a lot of work to go because we are now, this country was invented in 1776. We're approaching being pretty old at a certain
Hmm.
level, and we're still talking the first for a group of people who have been here since the establishment of this place. They're still
Absolutely.
working on that, and we should be happy about those, but uh we shouldn't camp out in that as our true accomplishment because that means we just got more that we're owed, more that's due to us. It's important for people to know uh again, the Holly Berry point is important, not just about Holly Berry, but important because of Diane Carroll,
Mm.
the Claudine of it all. Like, wow, you basically hold down a whole effectively independent film with the sheer gumption and power of your acting. And You're not relying on anything other than that. It wasn't like she was adorned in gown. All the ways we remember her, she is
Mm-hmm.
plain Jane, plain Claudine, a mother of like 8 children, single mother, and dating a sanitation worker. And she manages to hold that film down for the entire 2 hours in such a way that she is nominated for an Oscar,
Mm-hmm.
but she doesn't win. She gets a show. She's nominated for an Emmy. She doesn't win. It's like all of these ways that those awards are also about all of the people who did not get it and how hard it was and all they had to do in order to even get noticed at that register. So I think for me, it's really about us remembering that it is, like Nipsey Hussle said, a marathon. And
Mm-hmm.
we have had some of the most incredible runners in that race. And we all have a duty to continue that and to cheer on. Like when you go to marathons, there are the people on the side with the water and the towels and the fans and the friends who cheer. That's some of our work to do, especially when we think about how
Mm-hmm.
we can support an entertainment industry. Like that's a very ambiguous, non-existing one location kind of place. So how do you support it? It's like, are you giving water? Are you giving a towel? Are you cheering it on? Or are you just tearing it down? Because
Mm,
the tear down has a lasting impact more than the lifting up does.
absolutely. When we come Black in the Green Room with Marcus Hunter, I'm looking forward to tying this conversation up and getting your thoughts on what role and responsibility we as Black people play on our success in Hollywood.
Dropping, I love color hoodies, fly like soundtracks, 8 tracks, taking it back to LPs, that's a flashback. I laid out fashion on these streets like Beverly Hill asphalt. Got everyone driving clean, they can't help but feel the vibes. It's a full of soul. I'm from the East Coast where the rap game is gritty, spitting lyrics so raw they hit hard like the
Marcus, I want to know, is it a myth? Because we hear this all the time that Black people don't support Black people in entertainment. Is it a
Mm.
myth? And if there is some truth to it, where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it's a mixed bag, somewhere between myth and reality. One example that I think of is I mentioned the ancestor Frankie Beverly earlier. Um, and it wasn't until he ascended that his song, Before I Let Go, was registered platinum in sales.
Mm, mhm,
That's a real interesting factoid to me, given how prevalent the song is, how fundamental it is to the idea of a cookout or a barbecue or a block party. You cannot do
mhm,
those things without that song, yet the song had not reached 1 million sales until he was no longer here.
mm.
So that's a question. How many of us are bootlegging Black products?
Right.
And we don't think much about it because it's just a 4-minute song. But what would it have meant for that to be platinum when he was alive? For it to not be platinum culturally, but for it to be physically, materially platinum in sales. One. The second point is I think that part of what can happen a lot of times is a Black audience isn't often given enough time to make real decisions in terms of their content consumption. What do I mean?
Mm,
Some of your favorite things, they come on one time, maybe a second time, and then they don't come back. Or you get wrapped up in something and then it only has one season,
mhm,
or there is a season, but it's split into 3 parts and you don't know when they're airing and it's not really marketed well. And then people go to the people making it, see nobody's watching it. So part of it is
mm.
that is it given to us in a way that is digestible, consistent, and reliable? And the answer is oftentimes no. We'll have one year where there seems like there was so many Black films. The NAACP Image Awards doesn't know who to nominate, and then there are
Right.
other years where you're like, Jennifer Hudson for Aretha. Aretha. Okay, because it just wasn't that many. Not anything about the quality of that film itself, but in that particular year, there was a dearth. So part
Mhm,
of what happens is we're not at this point entitled to say we're going to have 25 mainstream films that are Black, telling Black stories every year. And we're always picking from that. It might be 2 here, 3 here, 4 here, 1 here. When you're watching award shows, I grew up watching for the Black parts. And
Mm-hmm.
I can't say that's changed. You can still watch the MTV VMA Awards and there might be two black parts.
Mm-hmm.
So you might watch the Grammys coming on Sunday, might be three black parts, and Beyonce is the most nominated artist. It's still a white show. So
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what can happen too, is about the consistency of our content. And I think we can always do better at supporting black content, but we
Mm-hmm.
also have to be vigilant in making the demand that it be given to us in a consistent, coherent format so that our creators are not penalized unfairly.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, tell me a little bit about your recent work that you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I just had a book come out last year called Radical Reparations, Healing the Soul of a Nation, which has a lot of Black culture all up in it. If you're really curious, you can get it anywhere you buy books, but there is a Diana Ross appearance in one of the stories in the book, and Motown is very important in one of the aspects as well. And then I've been, for the last 4 years, working on a dual biography of Whitney Houston and Luther Vandross. So I am
Nice.
excitedly underway on that as well. But also thinking about them as a demonstration of the possibilities and perils for Black success in, the post-civil rights era. What were the glass ceilings that they hit? Why did they hit them, and do they remain?
Mm-hmm. And where can we find you on social media so we can keep up with what you got going on?
Yep, MarcusAnthonyHunter.com. I'm on the IG streets at Marcus Anthony Hunter, on the sometimes banned TikTok streets at Marcus Anthony Hunter, on X, also Twitter at M Anthony Hunter.
All right. Dr. Marcus Anthony Hunter, thank you so much for joining me
You
in the
already know.
room. It was just a great conversation. And to have it from someone that, is an expert in this area was just so profound for me. And I appreciate you.
You already know.
Be sure to follow me, Keith Underwood, at Mr. Keith L. Underwood on IG. You can also follow me on FB at Keith L. Underwood. And you gotta follow Black in the Green Room at Black in the Green Room across all platforms. Until next time, this has been Black in the Green Room.